Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Springer Nature Black Employee Network Speaker Series. I'm Devin Williams, and today, for our fourth installment of the series, I'm joined by Professor Anthony Ryan Hatch from Wesleyan University. How are you doing today, Professor?
I'm very well. Good to see you, Devin.
Good to see you as well. How have you been making out with the weather lately over in Connecticut?
Well, we are awaiting the big ice storm, winter storm. We've got a lot of snow on the ground now, but I appreciate the winter. I respect the winter, and I'm actually glad we still have them for now.
Yeah, that makes two of us. Although I will admit that shoveling does get tiresome after a while, so I'll enjoy it while it's here. But a few snows, a few times a year is all right with me. Anything past that, I'm just looking forward to the spring and to the summer.
That's right.
So today I'm just going to be asking you a few questions, if that's all right with you, just so I can get to know you better, if that works.
It sounds great.
Awesome. So to start off, I'd like to ask, how long have you been working at Wesleyan University, and what is your role and responsibilities?
So I arrived at Wesleyan in the fall of 2015, and now I serve as the chair and I'm an associate professor of science and society at Wesleyan University. The Science and Society program is an interdisciplinary major at Wesleyan that focuses on science and technology studies, broadly defined. We have philosophers, historians, anthropologists, sociologists, English faculty joining us, teaching courses that focus on science, medicine, and technology as objects of study. And so I arrived here in 2015 and I'm now chair of our program. I'm also appointed in the Department of African American Studies, the Department of Sociology, and Environmental Studies at WES.
Well, that's awesome, and it sounds like you've got quite a full plate there. And I also loved sociology when I was in school. I One of my favorite courses.
As it is for many people, and I feel very fortunate because here at Wesleyan, I'm able to kind of put my hat on as a sociologist, but I'm also wear a hat as a science studies scholar. I'm also able to wear a hat as a Black scholar who focuses on African American health and the health of Black people. And so I'm able to kind of shift disciplinary locations depending on the project I'm working on. I'm able to teach classes that engage literatures from across those areas, and so I very much feel like I don't have to, stay in one lane, one disciplinary or academic lane. I can switch lanes, and that feels very freeing.
I bet the versatility speaks for itself. That's amazing, and as you said, you wear many hats. And I'd like to ask you, in your experience, what would you say your three most gratifying accomplishments are?
Professionally, I'm I'm most proud of a couple of things. First, and it's a hard thing to say, right? To say what one is most proud of, but I think my two books stand out for me. I didn't realize I would be a book writer, that I would have things to say, that I could share with readers. But my 2016 book, Blood Sugar, Racial Pharmacology and Food Justice in Black America, and my 2019 book, Silent Cells, The Secret Drugging of Captive America, both of which were published by the University of Minnesota Press, really represent the last 20 years of my intellectual kind of work. My book Blood Sugar began as my dissertation, and then has really opened me up to a whole new world of thinking about environment and health. This is a book that examined the science of metabolic syndrome, which is this biomedical category that epidemiologists and doctors and others use to identify populations of people who are at really high risk of having a stroke or a heart attack or developing type 2 diabetes. And so, the work I put into that project, both in terms of the people I met and the people I talked to and the people I trained with in writing that book, and since have been really rewarding. Um, and then the work on silent cells as well. I would say, thirdly, professionally, the thing I'm most proud of is my teaching and my relationship to my students. Since I was a graduate student, I have loved the art and craft of teaching, of designing a syllabus, of building a narrative, of connecting with my students and showing them as much empathy and grace as I have been shown as a student, and reflecting on it. I think those things are what I'm most proud of. Those long-term, deep thinking projects, and my ongoing love for teaching and for engaging with students.
That's excellent to hear, and we need more teachers like you. I mean, congratulations. I know I'm late to the game, but congratulations on being published.
Thank you. It's a strange currency to accrue, but not it's not a currency everyone collects. But a lot of capital went into getting it, so I appreciate that. Thanks.
Absolutely. And you mentioned environment previously, so I wanted to ask you, what was your experience in diversity and inclusion in STEM when you started your career in comparison to now?
Well, coming from the social science in the discipline of sociology, I got my PhD in sociology at the University of Maryland in College Park. And at the University of Maryland, which is a massive public research institution, research one institution, I was fortunate enough to be accepted into the American Sociological Association's Minority Fellowship Program. And this was a pre-doctoral fellowship designed to identify young scholars of color, specifically Black scholars at the time, principally, who were doing work on mental health and inequality that needed support. And I was very honored to be part of that fellowship program, which exposed me to lots of other scholars of many colors inside sociology and gave me a different angle of vision on what my field was like and the kinds of work that were possible. The Minority Fellowship Program has been in existence for over 50 years and has produced hundreds of sociologists of color who've gone on to lead our discipline, and lead the American Academy. So that was my first kind of substantive experience as a proto scientist, getting special additional support and training, financial support and intellectual training for the work that I would be doing. Um, Subsequently, I've also been able to benefit from an NIMH postdoc at the Morehouse School of Medicine in Atlanta when I first started my academic career at Georgia State in 2009. And then later, um, I was part of what was called the Summer Research Institute of the Racial Democracy, Crime, and Justice Network, which was based at Ohio State University. I mean, this was a fellowship program designed for early career scholars who were doing work on criminal justice, and who needed additional support, additional mentoring, additional counsel. And I benefited from these kinds of mentoring programs over the years enormously. And I don't think I would have been able to balance it all. I don't think I would have been able to get focused on writing and the craft of teaching had I not had all these additional kind of experiences with other Black scholars, mentors, and peers alike. So even though I was positioned in predominantly white institutions on the faculty side, I never felt like I was, kind of cast out to sea, and that I didn't have a support network to help me with my research, to help me improve my teaching, to help me pursue funding opportunities for my work if I needed it, and and also to help me balance and get some sense of what it would be like to be a healthy colleague, to be able to contribute to the life of my university, to my science, and so all those experiences were important for sure.
These sound like excellent experiences and excellent programs to be a part of. I'm so glad that you were able to be a part of them during your career. They just sound so beneficial. So I'm glad
Yeah.
that you were able to have these experiences and never feel like you were the only one, or as you put it, a cast out on these programs.
Right. I mean, each of them, it's worth saying, and there are initiatives throughout STEM, the STEM disciplines, and throughout the broader academy, to ensure that the professoriate is diverse in multiple ways, not just the student bodies of universities, but also the professoriate. And those efforts are ongoing. Um, when you're dealing with an institutional structure like kind of global science, it is one of its core features is that it has been a racial structure, right? When you look at who occupies the positions around the world, there's a clear racial hierarchy involved, and that's been the case for a while. So to dismantle and chip away at that system requires concerted effort, concerted resources, clear thinking, and a concern for equity, and for making things right. And so all those programs and many others, I think, need to be continued and supported for that reason.
Absolutely. And I want to, I mean, with that response, that leads into my next question of, do you feel the conversation on race and STEM has been a priority in academia? And if so, why not? If not, why?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that taking, for example, my colleagues here at Wesleyan as one small case study, my colleagues in the sciences are absolutely thinking about how they can support their students of color who come through their courses. They're thinking about how they can recruit and retain scientists of color into their departments, how they can bestow upon them all the kind of lavish support and hookup that's needed to really help young scientists and young scholars get going. Um, the response that I've seen here isn't mirrored everywhere, right? Certainly around the United States and certainly around the world, right? These structures are very resistant to change, and they're challenging. They're difficult to challenge because in some cases it involves directly not just calling out individual, say, gatekeepers, key faculty members, or deans, or university heads, or center heads who are making biased decisions and who are letting assumptions about the excellence of, say, a candidate, the perceived excellence or lack thereof, to determine who gets a job. Basically, just being racist. It's one thing to think about them individual people that you might need to challenge, but when a structure produces these kind of racial patterns, it's much more challenging to kind of intervene on. So I don't think that everyone that the I don't think that the racial structure of global science is going anywhere anytime soon. I'm trying to be, but I think that, and for that reason, I don't think everyone sees things in the same way, right? In other words, Devin, the same racial structures that exist within the broader society are also replicated within science, right? Science is not immune, to those social forces. So as everyone is contending with racism in the public sphere, and in terms of state action and state power and what corporations do, so too there is a reckoning that needs to take place in science, and how that reckoning unfolds is being played out right now.
Absolutely. And I think often you mentioned a few good points there as far as the structure, because it's not always a select few of individuals. It's the structure, and then it's getting to the root of the structure and how to rectify this structure that's been put in place for so long, and then challenging that and changing what individuals perceive as the norm. So it takes a lot. It's not a simple fix of removing or adding a few policies, for example. At the end of the day, you have to get to the root of the problem. And as you said, that you can apply that same line of thinking to the public, and everything that we're seeing today, through today, I should
That's
say.
right. So one thing that I value, just to make sure to stay focused on solutions, is that we want to make sure that there's people at the table making decisions. So who's at the table making decisions, right? Who are the gatekeepers, right? And I think that's one way to, as a mid-career, scholar, kind of advanced associate professor, I'm at the table when decisions are being made, and I welcome that role. I think it's important to be, just as wise as I can muster all the wisdom of my ancestors and my training to make a good decision, to offer wise counsel to my colleagues, because ultimately I want a science where everybody's at the table, right? I
Absolutely.
want a science where everyone has a seat at the table. And so, I feel I have in some sense, it's a duty or an obligation when I have a seat to take the seat and do my piece with it, right? If that metaphor makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. Literally and figuratively, having a seat at the table
Yeah.
and having that representation really goes a long way. And with having a seat at that table, I'd like to ask you, what things would you change or think need to be changed within the industry for the betterment of Black colleagues of the next generation and the progression of those currently navigating their careers?
Mm. I think we're at a very interesting moment because and it's a moment filled with a certain tension or contradiction. On the one hand, you have a small class of elite, well trained scientists of color. They're administrators, they're university leaders, they're in industry, they're in universities, and they have, through struggle and through sacrifice and through being positioned in the right networks, have risen to positions of power, and they're highly visible. And in their visibility, they become both target and an object to be consumed, right? Look at all the lovely Black scientists we have. Look at the work they're doing. There's a certain kind of performance to diversification, a performance to justice that can make it seem like just because we've got these bodies here, the problem is solved. So the visibility of those people does not necessarily mean that the structural conditions that underlie that representation have changed. So when we look at who is applying to graduate school, who is entering into doctoral programs, what's the pipeline like from high school through college through graduate school and on into the professoriate or into other venues where people who are trained in STEM can find meaningful work. That pipeline doesn't isn't looking as good as we might want it to look. So one thing I think that is needed is to for people to have a good, clear-eyed sense of that distinction between the representation, the image of diversity, the image that we fix the problem, and looking carefully at the structural reality. So this is more how we are looking at the problem that needs to be always kept in the forefront of our minds as we're looking at issues of equity in science. Um, the other thing I would say is about resources. You know, um, it's been amazing to get a small glimpse into the vast sums of resources that are mobilized by universities to support their scientists. Setting up labs, for example, right? Making massive investments in equipment and technology. And those investments aren't always equitably distributed. And so university leaders, provosts, CFOs, I think have an obligation to make sure that they're being equitable with how they distribute funds to scientists in their institutions as they're getting set up with their work. It's a simple thing. Just make sure you're giving everyone equitable resources, right? Um, you know, uh, it's a very simple thing that administrators could do to make sure, that they're giving all their faculty and their graduate students resources that they need to do well. I, had to feel like I had to kind of scrub and scrape to and limp along to kind of get, to do the work I was doing, and didn't have massive investments. I was had benefited from several fellowships, but none of the big ticket fellowships, and that felt like working at somewhat of a disadvantage. So those are two
Of
quick thoughts
course.
that come to mind.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that you brought up the representation piece because while representation is important, just because we have that representation in the example you gave doesn't mean that that's going to be attributed to retention in the pipeline that you mentioned. So, working on that pipeline and making sure that we can retain these Black scientists and Black graduates is extremely important.
Can I add one more piece to this? Because
Of
a
course.
colleague of mine, a senior colleague of mine who has since left my institution to go to another institution. Once she's a black woman, full professor, one of only a handful that we had at our institution at the time, and right around the corner from my office is there's a house that houses the kind of Center for Retired Faculty. And she told me to go. She's an anthropologist. She told me to go look and see who comes in and out of that house for retired faculty. A lot of older white male faculty. That's who's retired, right? I mean, every now and again, a white woman would come out of there. But there were no people of color coming out of that. There are none of us. If we're thinking about a pipeline all the way to the point of retirement, that I can be in an institution and literally retire here and accrue all those benefits, that's not happening, right? And so, black scholars, to be particular about it, aren't making it to that point. They're getting so consumed and fried out, right? So I think that having a mind toward nurturing our scientists, nurturing our talent, all the way from grad school all the way through that period is what we should be thinking about. Some scientists, I take it for granted that they're going to have an office there in that center one day, whereas I don't see that as a given at all.
And it's not a given. I'm glad you brought up nurturing and mentoring because I believe that's very important in any development, any career development, especially in STEM. So I would ask, what advice would you give Black graduates that are entering your field of STEM, such as sociology?
Hmm. Well, I will just channel the counsel that I've been given, which helped me make decisions when I didn't know what to do, which helped me frame my work in a way that made it legible to others. My dissertation advisor, her name was Patricia Hill Collins, a kind of a globally renowned sociologist, former president of the American Sociological Association, an author of the book Black Feminist Thought, gave me lots of sage advice about how to navigate different points in my career. One of which she was pretty simple, but she said to stay mobile, right? That always keep my resume and my CV ready to go, right? Keep accruing currency in case I needed to move. That the conditions for Black scholars in the United States are such that conditions might change and you might need to find a new job, right? A new president or dean might come in and make things difficult for you, especially if you're doing research that is critical of the status quo, and that brings in a different kind of attention to you, and so the work has to be excellent. And so she encouraged me to stay mobile, and not that I don't have allegiances to the institutions I work for, because I certainly give everything I've got to the people in them,
Of
but
course.
she was defining an employee employer relationship that I needed to be mindful of, right? That I needed to make sure that these institutions, just as soon as they've hired me, they can move on. And her experience in the American Academy, suggested that was the case. So I would encourage young Black scientists, grad students, junior faculty to really stay mobile, keep your head up, and keep that CV nice and crisp, because the opportunities that will come your way, that you need to be prepared to evaluate whether or not they make sense. Um, the the other counsel I would give is to, you know, it's in some ways it's difficult, because for scientists like myself, social scientists, we've our whole identity is bound up in the work that we do. And at the same time, I cannot value myself the same way this institutional structure values me. Like, I have to make sure that my what I perceive to be important in my life isn't necessarily always grounded in what these institutions of higher learning or of commerce or of government value. We are in these institutions, but not necessarily of them, and we didn't design them, and they weren't designed for us. And in some ways, until we can redesign, we can reconfigure to create space for ourselves in the work that we do, I think we are in this kind of insider outsider relationship to science that kind of defines how our conversation, right? I'm both in it and yet somehow not fully of it, quite yet. So having for scholars of color to have a recognition of that, I think, is really important. Not to say that that diminishes the contributions you make to your institution or anything along those lines, but it's just to recognize your position relative to that institution at all times. I sound very much like a sociologist saying this. Um, And finally, maybe a third piece of counsel, and I have to remind myself of this, is I love this work. I have an extraordinary privilege to be able to read and write and think and teach for a living. And so I have to stay joyful about it. I have to make sure that I keep both feet on the ground, stay grounded in that privilege, and with both feet on the ground, speak my truth as loudly as I can, and with a joyful heart. And it sounds a bit corny, but it's absolutely the case, especially right now here as we talk in February of 2021. There are dark forces at work in the world. And so if science is going to be a force of light, then, we've got to do it joyfully. And we've got to, do that with a mind to keeping everybody at the table. And that does mean is sometimes challenging my colleagues and other structures that are unequal or that are unjust. And we do that. But it also means not doing it with a bit of glum.
Absolutely. And I don't think speaking your truth sounds corny at all. I think it's very important to speak your truth and also enjoy the work that you
Yeah.
do. And with your mentors and people such as Patricia Hill Collins, excuse me,
Yeah.
in your life when you were going through your career or as you went through your career, um, do you have any role models that inspired your career?
Oh, there have been so many. I mentioned Dr. Collins, who, for many people, stands as an exemplar of a serious and a brilliant scholar whose work speaks for itself. The quality of the work speaks for itself. And I learned an extraordinary amount from Dr. Collins and remain grateful to her. Yet there have been other models that have also inspired me, and sometimes negative models, right? Sometimes it's a positive model, sometimes it's a model of things I don't want to emulate. I've seen a lot of that, a lot of the negative models. Um, but I'll mention one other person that, who well, I think I kind of credit with pushing me toward grad school, and her name was Dr. Claire Stirk. And Claire Stirk is the now retired president of Emory University in Atlanta. I worked for Dr. Stirk, 25 years ago, 20 years ago, at Emory University in the Rollins School of Public Health. And at that time, I was, a fresh college grad, but was knee deep in community-based public health research in the city of Atlanta, working on HIV/AIDS issues, substance use issues, prisons. I really was getting kind of this kind of crash course in all sorts of really innovative public health research projects. And I was considering pursuing a master's in public health and becoming a public health, continuing that journey of being a public health educator, interventionist. Um, and I had an offer to take up employment with a whole new project, and those professors wanted me to. This is Ralph DiClemente and Gina Wingood, two of colleagues who nurtured me and supported me at that time, and they wanted to hire me for a new project, and they said I would apply to Emory, and then I would go that route, and so it was a very tempting idea, and I went to Dr. Stirk with this offer and asked her what she thought, and she asked me um, if I wanted to work on someone else's research project my whole life, or if I wanted my own. And the kind of the egotistical kind of part of me was like, I would like to do my own. And she told me to then I should turn this offer down and go get a PhD in a social science, that in which I could study health or anything else that I was interested in. I was a philosophy major at Dartmouth, so she said not philosophy. I couldn't. She's like, don't do philosophy. But and so that moment, that really was the kind of genesis moment for me of thinking, I could go do this. Wow. And so I credit her with steering me in that direction at that time. And she continued to support me, in different ways over the years. But you know, um, I credit her for that. And something I learned from both Dr. Collins and Dr. Stirk, which is important, and something I'm trying to appreciate and emulate in my own mentoring now, is that they mentored me and gave me everything they had when I worked with them, right? They brought a feminist ethic of care and compassion and excellence to the work that they did, and I benefited from it, and as did everybody else, and I contributed as well. And that mentorship came to it. It ran its course, and then it came to an end. And then I needed to upgrade my mentors. I needed to move on. My own work moved on, and I needed to and they both gently and with love pushed me off to go figure out other folks to work with, and that was enormously helpful to keep me moving, right? And moving forward. And so I credit both of them for both of these women, extraordinary scholars, for helping me get my feet in this world, and for training me so well, but also for teaching me an ethic of reciprocity and an ethic of mentoring that supports me to this day.
And they sound like excellent mentors who provided you with excellent advice.
Yeah.
I think it's great that they kept pushing you and that you've had so many mentors at different stages of your career. Especially just that ties back into what you were saying before, just staying adaptable, staying loose and polishing off your CV, but also going in your own direction. That was very important.
I think so. And I think it's hard I imagine that it's hard. It certainly was challenging for me. I know this as now a mentor to many of my junior colleagues here at Wesleyan and around, that figuring out how to find your own way in this climate is challenging. There are great pressures to publish your research, to get funding, to teach with excellence, to be a committed and engaged scholar. And all those demands at a time when our own social lives are beset by so many challenges and stresses, it can be a real challenge for people to survive those. And so remaining flexible and adaptable and listening to the council of elders who themselves endured their own troubles and traumas, is a good way to go.
I absolutely agree. Especially as you mentioned today. I mean, the challenges that we face today with the pandemic, and the social challenges that we face today make it very hard to maintain all of those aspects that you just mentioned as far as mentoring, and research and the stress of publishing. So those are all things that are taken into account, and that just shows how important it is to have these mentors in your life.
Right.
And with it being February, happy Black History Month,
Happy
I'd like
Black History Month.
I'd like to ask you, if you have any Black inventors, that are a favorite of yours, and if they have any stories that resonated with you.
Oh, I love this question, Devin, because as you know, I've become very interested in Black invention and innovation, along with many other colleagues. I'm following my colleague Ruha Benjamin, a professor at Princeton University, and many others who've been long interested in race and technology in various ways. And so, but there are many great examples. The one that's most present for me right now is Henry Box Brown. And not a classic inventor in the same sense that we might think of a scientist inventor, but a creative inventor. Henry Box Brown was an enslaved man who shipped himself to freedom in a box, traded himself up, and shipped himself to freedom. And after emerging from this box, took on an identity and a career as a performer, as an abolitionist, as an educator, and used this story of his boxing himself to freedom, shipping himself to freedom, um, uh, to great effect. And to take an everyday object like a box and to envision such a dramatic function for that design, right, is just breathtaking, right? Just such a brilliant a stowaway, right?
It really is.
And so it's the to me it's the everyday Black inventions, the little things that everyday Black folks do, from the fancy, to on down, to innovate their lives, to make a way to survive, to help other people survive, and do so with flair and with a bit of a little bit of soul, a little bit of whatever that thing is. And I think that it's such a brilliant story, and I encourage people to go check out this important figure. There are many Black inventors of all stripes, but Henry Box Brown stands out as my example for today.
I will certainly look into Henry Box Brown. That sounds like just an unbelievable story. As you said, taking the average box and literally shipping
Yeah,
himself to freedom and then becoming an abolitionist and a performer is just I it's an indescribable story, and it's one that I will definitely be looking up and reading on.
indeed.
And with that, thank you for joining us today, Professor Hatch, and being a part of our speaker series. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much, and to all the folks, y'all be well, stay safe, wear your double masks, and I'll see you when the pandemic ends.
Absolutely. Stay safe.
Thank you.